Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cat and Sam show. And we have the most fantastic guest today, Cyrene, who's from Surviving Economic Abuse, which is an organisation in the UK. But I will hand over to Cyrene now to fill you in on her role and what the organisation does. Welcome, Cyrene.
Welcome, Cyrene.
Thank you so much, Sam and Kat, for having me on the show. It's really wonderful to be here. And I know, Sam, you've had an association with the organization that I'm a part of, Surviving Economic Abuse, for some time. And I think you're a fantastic ambassador also for the organization. So it's really great to be here. So I will start maybe with saying a little bit about SEE and then about my role within SEE. So Surviving Economic Abuse is a charity in the UK that focuses on raising awareness of economic abuse and transforming responses to economic abuse. And we work alongside sort of government, parliament, financial services, and a whole broad range of stakeholders to identify and to respond appropriately to economic abuse and to hold perpetrators to account. And we can talk in more detail about that and the organization later on. In terms of my role, so I'm the legal and policy manager here at SEE, as we call ourselves. And I lead on all things sort of legislation and policy related. Prior to joining Surviving Economic Abuse, so I have a background in law. I was a government lawyer with the Ministry of Justice in the UK. Before that, I have many years of experience working on gender, human rights, and international development. And I've worked with organizations like Oxfam and the UN previously. So that's sort of me and my role at SEE, kind of in a nutshell. And happy to speak more about that as we go along.
No, and I mean, I have to say, when I discovered SEE and that economic abuse was actually a thing, that I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around economic abuse, what it actually is and what it looks like, and that it's not just, oh, you don't have as much money as you want, or somebody's just frugal, so they do like to keep a check on the household outgoings and things like that. So you'll probably put it better than me about the description, I suppose, where the line is between those two things. And sort of, for me, economic abuse is about when things are weaponized and that there is a repercussion to you from that other person. But you might be able to put it in a bit more of a legal way, so that people can understand sort of what it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can put it in a legal way, and that will take me on to then talking about the legislation. We have a Domestic Abuse Act that was passed in 2021, and SEE has done a lot of work around economic abuse within the Act as well. But just in terms of, so there's the legal definition, and what we want is for the legal definition to marry up as much as possible with how the behaviors manifest themselves in real life. And I think we've gone quite a good way towards doing that actually in our law. But let me start a little bit. Let me rewind a little bit also about SEE as well, and kind of why kind of the raison d'etre actually for the organization, because we are talking here about domestic abuse, and I know that this is the area of interest for you, Kat and Sam, and you've done sort of so much around raising awareness and talking about this issue, bringing it out into the forefront. So I think so with economic abuse, it's quite a hidden form of abuse compared to other forms like physical abuse, sexual abuse, and others which are more sort of recognized and more sort of recognizable. So SEE was actually set up and for the reason that there was a need for an organization dedicated to economic abuse, dedicated to looking at economic abuse and transforming the response to it. Whereas other domestic abuse organizations will have economic abuse alongside other forms of abuse that they will deal with and respond to. There was very much a feeling that there needs to be a specific focus on economic abuse. So with surviving economic abuse, we also work alongside around 100 women who are experts by experience. So all of our work, our policy work, our regulatory work, all of the work that we do is informed by their priorities and what they actually want to see, the changes that, victim survivors want to see in the law, in the policies, in regulation, and so on. So that's very much sort of where we come from. And the reason also being that economic abuse is something that often underpins other forms of abuse, and therefore it's not picked out. So it's there often at the bottom of sort of as a foundation for coercive control and a range of abusive behaviors, and its effects can last long after the actual physical abuse or other forms of abuse are over. And what we found is that for women, sometimes the economic control and the economic ties to the perpetrator were the most difficult to unentangle or disentangle themselves from. So that the effects of economic abuse can go on for decades or even last a lifetime, when other forms of abuse might have actually stopped through either legal intervention or by leaving or removing the perpetrator. So that's kind of a little bit of sort of where we are coming from. I mean, I can go into sort of what is economic abuse, sort of how it's different from sort of so-called ordinary or normal relationships that, couples have over finances. Would you like to go into that, or do you want to come back on anything I've just said?
No, I mean, that's, the fact that C is, survivor, expert by experience, informed. And there was things that, so for instance, I didn't realise, and they can be the smallest of things. I didn't realise until I went to try and remove myself from the joint account that he'd set up, which was where he put the money that he could then see what I was spending everything on, that I couldn't actually get away. I couldn't remove myself from that account. So he could have run all sorts of debt up on that account, which I would have been 50% responsible for, but I couldn't remove myself from that account without his permission. So it was when I read things like that you were looking at, and that, so from the really big stuff to getting it into the Domestic Abuse Act in the first place, to actually understanding the methodology and that and now the involvement of the financial sector, like banks, who are, the people that C are helping to write off the debt that's been incurred by the perpetrator, but the victim is left with. I think it's fantastic. And, I know that coercive and controlling behaviour and economic abuse isn't law everywhere around the world as part of the Domestic Abuse Act, or any kind of domestic abuse laws. But I think the awareness as well of that level of control, hopefully will go a long way to, you can't escape from somewhere if you haven't once you've lost control of your finances, whether your tenancy agreement is in joint names and how to separate that, and, your wages, where are your wages paid into, or any benefits you may get. And then there's, the issue with child maintenance and things like that. So what I love is that this is all the area that C covers, and it is vast. And I'm really grateful that there is an independent, specific body and organisation looking at these areas, because I think it's quite a common thing. I don't know in the report, and it's just, but the way it's viewed by society and the legal profession, we'll talk about the report later, the criminal justice system, I mean, is like you're just being a greedy cow, or you've not, you're useless with money, or, because when you're not, but you're kind of portrayed that way, or you're treated that way, and it's because somebody else is actually sabotaging your ability to earn, or your autonomy around your own money, or they've just quite simply defrauded you, or thieved from you, But there's this idea that when it's in a couple, somehow it's okay. Whereas if I think it was two people who didn't have that relationship connection and the same things were happening, I think people would absolutely see it for what it is.
Well, there's so much.
I mean, absolutely. Sorry, Kat, did you want to come in?
I was just going to say there's just so much to that emotionally that is not understood. I mean, when you are gaslighted and you are consistently tore down in a way on a daily basis, and then you add in economic to try to figure out what is really going on there when you're fighting all that coming towards you about, I mean, you can't even load a dishwasher right sometimes. And me and Sam have laughed about that. I don't know how many people say that over and over again, but it sounds silly. At the same time, it's it's hammered over and over day by day. People don't get that. The best analogy I've come up with is just looking at the Stockholm syndrome and how that only took 4 days, and now we have somebody who's in a 10-year relationship or a 5-year relationship. Their economics are involved in that, and to try to pull away from that when you have kids to feed and you have housing and all the things. And so I think it is very much integrated into that. I'm glad there's an organization there. I think it's starting to come. We have a thing here in Colorado that's called Self-Sufficiency, where they work in helping people to be self-sufficient and economic kind of stuff. But so
yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, because it's that insidious nature, isn't it, Kat, as you were saying, it kind of can really creep up on you. And I think that's partly why it's difficult to sort of identify or recognize. And also the kind of myths around, or the kind of, popular understanding of what relationships should be. And so someone coming along, Sam, like you were alluding to, people saying, oh, well, we'll look after you, I'll look after your money. You don't need to worry about it. So it's kind of framed in that kind of caring, in that sort of narrative, and then it moves on to something else gradually, by which time you're not sure what's happened. And I think you use the word control, Sam, a couple of times, and that, I think that's really the crux of it. So when is there something in the relationship where it makes you feel uneasy? It makes you feel that there's a level of control, as opposed to a situation where someone might actually say, look, can we really afford another car? Shall we just think about where our money is? Can we have a discussion? I know this is something important to you, but let's talk about it, without any fear on the part of the person with whom the discussion is being had. And in terms of sort of framing this and kind of understanding it, we actually frame it in terms of sabotage, restriction, and exploitation of resources. So you can kind of put, and they're not like very clear cut categories. There might be overlaps, but so something like sabotaging. And again, I think, Sam, you mentioned this. So not letting someone go to work, or not letting someone get their qualifications so that they are in a situation where they can earn an income. So that's a form of sabotaging someone's resources. You could restrict someone's resources, right? So you could control how they spend their money. You could be checking their receipts. And you could control other property, like how they use their phone. So that's a form of sort of restriction of someone's resources. And you could also exploit their resources. You could steal someone's money.
I was talking to somebody this weekend, and their credit was used all the time, and his was left alone so that his sparkled and shined, and hers looked like terrible. And
The credit scores of victims is actually a really big point, isn't it, Cyrene? Because that's what they're like. Victims are often left with really bad credit scores, whereas, like you say, Kat, the perpetrator is all shiny and buffed up, and they've manipulated it. And I think it's also the manipulations. Not just the you cannot go to work. It's somehow making you late every morning, or ringing you all the time at work, or turning up at your work so that it's uncomfortable for you to be at work, or your bosses are, and you get the sack, quite sometimes sort of manipulating things so that actually you're fired. But the credit score thing is,
well, and I think that also goes into thinking about the shame that comes along. So all of a sudden, your credit is tanked. You're unable to understand how you got to this point because of everything else that you've been fighting, and now you have to like buff up against like, I didn't know. And somebody's like, how do you not know what's going on with your credit? How do you not know somebody's taking your money? How do you not know somebody's using your identifiers in order to pull credit and have more money on their side? How do you not know that? And it's like, it's another way of feeling like you're getting blamed when you just didn't know and you've been set up. I think using the words con and using the words perpetrator on people that are actually going after people in these situations helps the public to see that this isn't about being hit on one front of somebody coming after your finances. This is about somebody coming after your finances along with coming after you personally.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's so integrated.
Yeah. And that is why, for instance, the financial services sector has such a big role in all of this, because the things like, how did you not know? Obviously, if you have given your PIN number to somebody and they know how to enter your accounts, and you have done that through control, then obviously you would not know what's coming out of your account. But as it's basically making the whole of the financial services industry really understanding that economic abuse is very prevalent. And how do you spot the signs of it? So you're there applying for a joint mortgage, and your bank manager is chatting to you, and you're both there, and they don't see through what's going on, so you just sign that piece of paper. But spotting the signs, like, why is she not saying anything? And sorry, I'm very much on that side, because we do work with with women, so it's often the female partner, sometimes not completely, it can happen both ways. But in a situation like this, she's sitting there, she's not saying anything. And unless you're trained to pick up those signs and kind of understand how people interact with each other, and there's something not quite right here, and then you might want to find some way to find out. And you have to do that also in a safe way, because sometimes, just giving her a call might not be the best way, because if he's controlling your phone and everything that you do, how you eat, sleep, and breathe, then that might be putting someone in danger. So there's a massive safeguarding issue here as well, in terms of how banks, building societies, financial services can respond in an appropriate way. So it's a complex area, but it's definitely one in which we are making headway. And maybe this is quite a good segue to the Domestic Abuse Act and sort of how we've dealt with it here. So, like I said, this piece of legislation came out was passed in 2021, And there is now, for the first time, a statutory, a legislative definition of domestic abuse. And this definition includes economic abuse. So organizations like SEE led on kind of the recognition of economic abuse as a distinct form of domestic abuse. So along with physical abuse, sexual abuse, and other forms of abuse, you actually have economic abuse named there, which, from our point of view, was a massive win. It's out there, it's named. And there is also a definition of economic abuse within the Act as well. And it's quite a broad definition. So it's around not just controlling someone's money, but it's about controlling the way someone acquires, maintains, or uses money, as well as other property. And this also then brings me on to sort of the sort of distinction between sort of financial and economic abuse, because a lot of people are more familiar with the term financial abuse. I think it's kind of more prevalent. But we would prefer economic abuse as a wider term, because it's about controlling not just money, not just your finances, but what money can buy. So, and that suddenly expands it to a whole lot of other things like your housing, your property, transportation, food, all of that. So if someone is controlling those things, so it goes out to like, this whole thing of when you come back from the supermarket checking your receipts, are you only buying sort of value products? Are you only allowed to buy value products, whereas a perpetrator has access to other kinds of products? So
I
all
think
of
that
those.
I think it's that thing as well. It's like, which I've experienced where his bread would come from an expensive artisan bakery, but our bread had to be the reduced section on the outside. So it's about what the picture is like for all of you. If say you and your children are having to buy clothes, say from secondhand shops or whatever, but they're shopping at Savile Row, if their car is fantastic but yours is on its last legs. But I think there's also ways that they can induce things like my car was on a lease that was in his name and everything. Now, what I didn't know is that he'd done stuff that meant that actually I was driving illegally, and my insurance was null and void. So had I crashed, not only would I be in trouble with the law, I would have had to have paid for any damages. Luckily, I didn't. So there are sneakier ways of doing it, and like you said and I suppose this sort of goes into the post-separation abuse as well. But what you talked about earlier about those financial connections that are post-separation, that are supposed to be sorted, done, dusted, no manipulations around that is necessary. It's just it's a settlement, it's an agreement, that's it. But the sneaky ways that they can still actually perpetrate, the power that somebody has if they are the paying parent to the resident parent over maintenance, and I do know of people who pay it so that they can withdraw it when the resident parent who they're abusing is doing something they don't want or don't agree with. So, it's not always about somebody not paying the maintenance. So if you say, oh yeah, they're paying the maintenance, people say, oh well, he's absolutely fine or she's absolutely fine. She's obviously, they're obviously looking after their child. But actually it's weaponized. So some months it'll be there, some months it won't, depending on what they may have demanded of you or your child and has been refused them,
And then you get into like the whole, like if I complain about this and if I have to go to court and if they get jailed or if they get a fine, then the retaliatory is again in some way that knocks that whole system down. So, I mean, I love that you're saying economically, because I'm also thinking about, and I'll go back to it. I went kind of to it before, but thinking about how this is done in a very deliberate way. I mean, I kind of was struck by when Sam said, here I am going to get secondhand clothes and he's doing this with some rich thing. And I think the slight in that is that he gets to have nice things and you're lower on the totem pole. And what that does to a person over and over and over again. They can't load a dishwasher right. They can't do this. They have to have less than. They're only trying to help you. I mean, it takes that whole realm of somebody being really good to you to somebody not being good to you, and you're being attacked and trying to figure that out. So I like the fact that you're saying economic rather than just financial, because I mean, if financial is all about adding and subtracting, right? I mean, it's money. It moves in one area and not. It gets a percentage. It doesn't get a percentage. It's not difficult. I mean, not saying that math's not difficult, because sometimes math is difficult. But my point is, that it does breed into that, and I do love what you're doing as your organization in looking at it economically, and also having those survivors telling you what is hitting that. And I just hope that people are understanding that it's not as easy as just adding and subtracting and somebody taking your stuff. It's a lot to that whole system of trying to hurt somebody just to get your gain, whatever that is for an abuser.
Absolutely, and it's there at the point of trying to leave an abuse as well, because if you don't have the funds, if you don't have access to funds, then how can you leave? So one of the things that we are also concerned about is the kind of move to a digitalization. So people don't realize that cash is actually very important sometimes to victim survivors, because it's less easy to track. So if you have some money with you, then you are you might be safer or able to put yourself in a position of safety more than if you just had a card on which everything could be tracked. So it's very important at the point of trying to escape, and also very important once you do, if you do manage to escape, because how do you rebuild your life without economic security? So and maybe this I could just touch on kind of the post separation abuse bit now, Sam. That might be
absolutely.
So we talked a bit about the Domestic Abuse Act and naming economic abuse within the definition of domestic abuse, and also defining economic abuse in itself, which gives a lot more kind of light on what this might involve, not just money, but what money can buy. And then the other thing that we did through the act was looking at the offense. We have an offense called the offense of controlling or coercive behavior. We call it CCB, coercive control. And that, at the time of the Domestic Abuse Act, was limited to a situation where people were in a relationship or living together. And we found that a lot of economic abuse actually happens post-separation, once someone has managed to leave. And we felt it was really, really important to consider economic abuse, or economically controlling behaviors within coercive control. And so we campaigned for an amendment to the coercive control laws to extend it to post-separation abuse, which we were successful in doing. And another thing that was very important, the survivors that we worked alongside with. So, and that has led to lots of sort of very positive changes. So now economic abuse is recognized within the guidance of the coercive or controlling behavior offense. It's recognized as something, and there are lists of how this, abuse could take place. And Sam, you already alluded to some of it, like non-payment of child maintenance. Child maintenance is an incredible tool for perpetrators, because, like you said, it's not just not paying, it's also erratic payments, it's delayed payments, it's not paying for a long time and then paying just when you think you're going to get caught out, or the child maintenance service is going to come after you. And I'm sure you have equivalents over there in the States as well, Kat, on the mechanisms. They may be.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, even if you go up against them at that time, then there goes some of your financial coming in. So there's I don't want to push up against that as the survivor when I'm dependent on that. I mean, it's just really a nasty um, combination. Sorry to keep going with what you were going with.
But I think it's really interesting as well is that, along with an awful lot of coercive and controlling behaviours and domestic abuse behaviours, is the patterning and the methodology that is, once you understand it, once you grasp the nub of its power and how they utilise. I mean, anything can be weaponised by an abuser, literally anything. But they do have favourite tools, and controlling somebody's access, just like keeping somebody's bus pass from them, that restricts, that then keeps them isolated. It maybe means that they're late for work, the hiding of stuff. But what's interesting is the interlinking of it all, but it standing alone as a very, very strong tool that abusers like to use, and this recognizable methodology. So I know, like, some people listening would sort of like say, well, how would I be able to tell? How would I be able to tell the difference? But I think, like, once you understand coercive and controlling behaviour and the patterning within it, and it is about the patterning and the joining up of the dots. So it's not just the one incident, it's not just the one thing. And are they all feeding into each other? That's when, as an outsider, you're able to recognise maybe what's going on for somebody else and be able to step in some way, whether that's, through as an employer, and this is IDA, Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse, do this, whether our employers need to be understanding this as well. So banks, not only for their customers, but actually for their staff within their banks as well. Just seen put on the post about Kellogg's and what Kellogg's are doing for their staff members. We as a society, we need to educate ourselves like this, like we have done with I hate to say it, but like with child sexual assaults and the grooming and the, how people in power, the Me Too movement and things like that, or whatever, but how they use a very similar patterning. And it's interesting that, I can give examples that you would recognise, that Kat would recognise, that everybody would recognise all around the world, of a very similar thing that the perpetrator has employed on them in order to achieve an aim which links to coercive and controlling behaviour, which is the isolation, the psychological, the emotional, mental, and other, violences and abuses that go with it. And it was interesting with the report, wasn't it, Cyrene, that C have just have the Home Office and C worked on together, and actually how difficult it is even for the police to understand and therefore prosecute. It's a proper crime.
No. Absolutely, yeah. So just to correct, so that this was a C report done by us. It was done actually by Surviving Economic Abuse. It was our research, and we looked at some work that the Home Office had done as well, around like a review of controlling or coercive behavior offence that they'd done. But it was actually a report that we put out. Yeah, but
I meant to say
but also, I mean,
with the Home Office, not by the Home Office. Sorry, apologies.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. No, that's fine. It's just that it was sort of written separately, and it would be very interesting to see what the government response is to that. And we are working on sort of taking forward the recommendations and so on, along with the government and along with Home Office. So they're obviously incredibly important partners, stakeholders in all of this. But what we did is we looked at over 800 successful prosecutions of coercive control of the offense. We looked at it through media accounts because we didn't have access to the direct data. So that was really interesting because we did a similar report a few years ago where we had only something like 35 cases because it had not been, prosecuted. It was a new offense. So now we had a much better sort of wealth of data to look at and to analyze. And it was very much what you were saying, Sam, around patterning. So it's people see incidents, so they see assault, they see actual bodily harm, grievous bodily harm, they see incidents, but they don't see the pattern underneath that. And I think that's what coercive control is, a pattern of behavior that's, that needs to be seen as such. And when it comes to prosecution, it's easier, or it appears now, maybe because of the lack of understanding, easier to prosecute on single offenses. And you don't want to be in a situation where you say, well, don't prosecute. You want to prosecute on something. And so basically it's also around training of the police, picking up on coercive control as a pattern, and therefore charging for that offense as opposed to individual offenses. Because if you say assault, it could be an assault anywhere. Whereas if you say coercive control, it's within a personal relationship, and that's how coercive control is defined. And that's very important in terms of kind of building up the evidence as well around how all of these different forms of abuse can thread through. And we would find survivors who would go to the police and explain what's happened. And because economic abuse was less understood, post-separation abuse was not part of the law, it was very difficult to be picked up as part of coercive control. And people might see it as, oh well, that's a financial issue, where's the domestic abuse part of it? That's fraud, or that's not part of this. And I think what you were saying around employers and all of that, we really need to make domestic abuse everyone's business, and economic abuse everyone's business as well, because that is just that does really underpin so much of abusive behaviors and coercive control. Absolutely.
Yeah, one thing that's coming to, there are a couple of things that came to my mind when you guys were talking is Sam and I have teased about this poor lady that was at the butcher about the receipt that she didn't have. And she told the butcher, well, you know how he gets if I don't bring back a receipt. And Sam and I were like, well, how does he get? And you can see on a thing from your bank statement, it is the same amount that they use every week. So why would it be that we have to have this receipt unless we're just, and maybe Sam can set that up better.
Yeah, it was at a butcher, and I saw an older lady who obviously went to the same butchers every week and bought the same items every week, or pretty similar. And it's about how sort of we as a society know these things are happening. We're just not really putting them at the front of our brain. And the butcher actually said to her, you need the receipt, don't you? And she said, oh yes, you know how he gets if I don't. I forgot it last week. And it's like, so that butcher knew that receipt was a pretty critical piece of paper. But it wasn't until I'd understood and seen some of C's research and seen your work and worked with you that the power of that piece of paper, and asking that question, like Kat said, well, what does he do? What is he like if you forget the receipt? And why shouldn't she be in charge? It's her husband. Why shouldn't she, as the wife doing the shopping every week, be in charge of whatever she spends managing that money?
Yeah, and quite often it could be that she's just given an allowance. That's why she's given, I don't know, like if it's £15, it's crucial that she has that piece of paper because it shows that she hasn't gone beyond the so-called imposed limit, right?
Yes. Yeah. But it's about, what was it? And actually, having the wherewithal, the butcher and these are people who are placed really in the heart of our communities, having the wherewithal to actually know and understand that she needs that receipt. But I think it's difficult for people to say, well, how do I take it a step further? How do I say to her, are you safe? How do I take that conversation further with somebody in a way that's not overstepping social boundaries or not putting somebody in danger? And I think, one of the things that I like on C's website and other people's websites, there are actually practical solutions for people. We're not just saying to people, oh, you should do this and you should do that. You've actually got practical solutions, whether it's in a workplace or how somebody deals with their bank or their landlord, or you've actually got, if they're not there actually sort of on your site, you've got signposts to people who can help. And I think that's pretty critical as well, because we can have the law, but unless people actually understand what the law is about, then, which is what we found with coercive and controlling behaviour. I mean, I know when Kat and I first started talking, and it was like, oh, the UK's got all of these fantastic laws. And it's like, yeah, we do. We've had the coercive and controlling behaviour law since 2015, but our prosecution rates are not what they should be. And it's not just down to the police, it's down to the Crown prosecution and the judges. But, people need the training. They need to be able to understand. And I think that's somewhere like in the US, when, hopefully they start adopting these laws, they can learn from our mistakes, in the sense of, you bring out a new law, you make sure every cop, every prosecutor is actually trained in that law, and then maybe the figures will be a bit different, which would be good.
Well, it also makes me think about, and I don't know that Serini knows about her, but there's a gal in the United States. Her name is Judy Malinowski. Judy Malinowski is important to the United States because she's the only person in United States history to testify at her own murder trial and won. And it's because he was caught on an ATM setting her on fire. And it's because she lived 262 days after that day. And it's because that legislation, or not legislation, but lawyers and law professors and things got involved with her in order to help that situation come to a resolve, because of our laws and how lax they were in prosecuting him for her ultimate death that was going to happen due to the extremity of the extreme of what he did. And I bring her up because, and I give you that little bit of clue of who she is. She had breast cancer and she became addicted to opioids. She got off the opioids.
They were prescribed for the breast cancer pain, and she knew that she was having an issue. She went back to her doctors and things like that. But then eventually, you take it up, Kat.
Yeah, and then she ended up with this man, and then he ended up exploiting her, because this is what his MO was getting with women who had drug addiction problems and keeping them on drugs and then controlling their money. So what he was doing to her is he was telling her mother that she was addicted and that he needed money from her mother in order to pay for the pills that he was getting for her. So he was taking money from the mother to supposedly get the drugs that he was getting for her. And so the mother didn't know it at the time. She thought she was paying for an electric bill that wasn't being paid for because her daughter was addicted. So she thinks she's helping the situation, and she's being exploited economically. And I think about the fact that you have the economic community or people looking at her and looking down on her because she's addicted to drugs, and she's not going to look favorably by other people just because she's addicted. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's it's
Yeah,
it's
it's the whole
unfortunate
victim
that
blaming and
right, but you're also going to get people who maybe didn't um, fill out a government paper like taxes correctly because their significant other doesn't want it done that way, and now they're going up against law, and it's something they wouldn't have done had they not been in the situation.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it,
Inducement
you
to
know,
breaking the law, fraudulent credit cards and things like that. That
that you've been
inducement
coerced
is
into.
yeah, it's coercion. Everything comes back to that coercive and controlling behavior, doesn't it, Cyrene?
yeah, and we talked about the forms, the framework of sabotage, restriction, and exploitation. So Katios is a perfect example of exploitation, and other things as well. But
But I think giving it a kind of a narrative, it helps. You know, you've got to remember, at least this is how I believe, you've got to remember that people that are survivors or people that are targeted may be sitting there and they're just trying to make it through the day. So giving them a complicated law term that says this is what the law is and it talks about exploitation, they may be going, okay, what does exploitation mean?
no,
How
and
does that
yeah,
affect me? You know what I'm saying?
I
It's just
think
the
you're absolutely
simplicity.
right. And that's why, I mean, if it's kind of not very straightforward for kind of police and criminal justice agencies to fully grasp, then how would a victim survivor who is grappling with managing her kids, trying to keep a job down, and everything else, claiming benefits, to also fully grapple with all of the ins and outs of the law. And that brings me to another point that I want to make, which is that really, you have these criminal justice responses, but they're only one response. And many, many, many victim survivors never go to the police. They never report. So you have to also think about services. So when you have your domestic abuse services in your local community, uh, do they include economic advocacy? Do they include things like looking into coerced debt? Do they bring in what we call the non-traditional stakeholders, like your banks and your high street building societies? Look at, well, how can they be part of the solution? Because you need to be part of that solution if you're going to extricate someone fully from this situation and help them rebuild the lives of themselves and their children independently. So I think it's very, very important. Obviously, as a lawyer, I guess I'm biased towards laws, but what this work has shown me is that it's really only part of the solution and can be actually very, very small part of it. So one of the things, if you talk about this report again, it's called Seen Yet Sidelined, and it's looking at how economic abuse is reflected and responded to in this range of successful prosecutions that we looked at. So what about financial redress for what's happened? So we found that it's only in something like 2% of cases that compensation was awarded. And yet there are procedures within the law that can do things like confiscate the assets of a perpetrator that can then be used for compensation. But when you look at the criminal justice system, you're thinking punishment, aren't you? Let's get the person behind bars. So let's. It's very much a punitive measure. It's not a restoration measure. And that's what we are saying. Actually, for the survivor, yes, obviously you want to see justice, and part of justice is punishment for a crime, and that's why the legal system, the criminal justice system, is there specifically. But then there's also things like, how about putting her in the same position she would have been in if not for the economic abuse that she experienced? How about getting him to pay economically for where she is now? Because putting him behind bars is not the end of her story. It might be the beginning of another chapter that is going to be extremely difficult as she tries to kind of navigate all the economic pitfalls that she's going to be having to face.
Yeah, that restoration and restorative element, I think, is pretty critical, don't you, Kat? I mean, that's it makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's huge. I mean, I love all that you're saying and that you're trying to bring in. I just think that sometimes people in these situations, the targets and the survivors are like, I mean, they fight so much with like, okay, if I do this, then this is going to happen. If I do this, then this is going to happen. Because we do know that in research that it's best to go with what the survivor is feeling in their gut because they've been in that arena, so they kind of know kind of where they're going. Maybe, I mean, they're very chaotic and they change their way of controlling all the time anyway. So um, I don't know where else I was going with that, but I feel like, I mean, I love what you're doing over there, Sereni. I think that it's wonderful, and that legal aspect of that getting involved with changing the way that the courts and the the punishment can be looked at. Um,
But I think that is actually a really important point in all of this, to be victim centered, to be trauma informed and to be victim centered in your responses, I think is very, very important. You are the expert of your experience. You know what you want, you know where you want to be going to, and respecting that and putting that at the heart of whether it's a criminal justice system or the family court system. I mean, that's another whole area. But for instance, family courts can very much be an avenue to perpetuate economic abuse, because taking someone repeatedly to family court through unnecessary applications, is a way of depleting someone's resources, and you're trapped because you need that in order to regulate things like contact, and how you're going to manage your family. So it's something where you kind of have to keep going back in order to kind of stand your corner. And yet, with the absence of with kind of restrictions on legal assistance, the legal aid that you can get, this becomes a massive area. And actually, in coercive control now, there's a recognition that things like family courts are a tool for perpetrators to continue with economic abuse.
Yeah, because it's the thing where if somebody, if somebody put in even in civil law, if somebody puts in a claim against you and you just go, right, I'm just going to ignore it. This is the 10th time they've done it or whatever. I'm just going to ignore it. You can't. You're not allowed to, because if you do, then a judgment is made without your presence, and in their favour. So you are completely trapped between a rock and a hard place. Um, but yeah, thankfully they are sort of looking at things like that. But that's why, like Kat and I love getting on people like yourself, where we can hear what you're saying, and there's sort of like the official speak, so the facts and the and all of that, but we can ask the questions and hopefully carry on the conversation to talk about, you know like we've used tonight, and you've said about the actual sort of examples of what the everyday reality of it looks like for the targets, for the survivors and victims. I just think, yeah, I mean, I just think you do fantastic work. And the brilliant thing is, of course, is now, because we've got the internet, everybody can go on your website and access the information, even if C aren't global yet, hopefully one day, and tackling on other countries' laws, you know, there is anybody that's interested or feels that they need to know, they can at least go to your website to arm themselves with information, and maybe then go and talk to their bank if they have been coerced into debt, if they have got, a credit card that they know that they shouldn't have, or something's happening, and how can they go, what language could they use, and all the rest of it, to actually speak to their bank about. And it's there, the resource is there. I think it's fantastic. And is there more that you would like to say?
Not really, except that it's kind of a nice way to end, because it goes back full circle to the Domestic Abuse Act, actually, and how the recognition of economic abuse within a piece of legislation is just so powerful. And that is something for survivors to say, look, here is a definition, it's recognized, and it is up to, agencies to, act accordingly.
Absolutely. And I
Thank you
suppose,
so much for coming
yeah,
on.
it's fantastic, and yes, it's been brilliant. It's been so informative and just wonderful to speak to you. So thank you.
Well, thank you
Hopefully
so
you'll
much
come
for
back
giving
on
me
and we
the
can pick your
opportunity.
brain
It's been
again.
Sorry,
excellent
what was
just
that?
having this chat.
I said, hopefully she'll come back on and we can pick her brain again. Because I've just been listening and going, makes me think. And, she's got a bright sense of personality and light. And she's very passionate about what she does, which is awesome. And like I said, I'm glad somebody's kind of broadened that horizon of the economic instead of just and all of that. I think it's been a good show.
Well,
So
thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. It's been just great chatting to you.
you bet. We'll have you on again if you want to come.
Absolutely.
So,
And if anybody wants any information, there'll be links attached below to Surviving Economic Abuse website and the all the various different connections and things down there. So you can find it, and I'm sure that we'll carry on the conversation, Kat and I, put in another video as well as with Cyrene, or it's fantastic. So thank you for joining us, and we hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you. Have a great day. It was wonderful meeting you.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.